and welcome to the Training Ground Podcast with your host, Kevin Barry. In this episode, Kevin is speaking with Adam Parr. Adam is an assistant strength and conditioning specialist with the MLS team Minnesota United. Today they'll be discussing his internship experience with EXOS, formerly Core Performance, why he chose to study sports science and strength and conditioning, his coaching journey into the MLS, key metrics to know regarding GPS data, and what training in the off-season looks like.
Adam, I appreciate you coming on the Training Ground podcast today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
I know it's a little bit quieter this time of year in the off season for you and your personal role, but just taking it a step back a little bit, when did you first get involved in soccer and kind of what was the impetus for that?
I played soccer my entire life, to be honest, from the time I was a kid. I think I first began playing when I was 6. And then quickly, a few years into it, I wound up, moving up the levels in youth soccer and playing, to basically a competitive level. That was before the academy system even hit the States. So there wasn't the ability for that. But, going and playing in national tournaments and stuff like that, traveling around. And then once I got into high school, the high school I went to was actually a national powerhouse. And that was back when, a lot of people were still very much into high school soccer because, again, the academy system hadn't been developed yet. And so we were a national powerhouse. And actually, my senior year of high school, we wound up going undefeated and we were ranked number 1 in the nation. So we wound up being national champions, which was a great experience for me to be part of a team that, won a high school national championship, so to speak.
When you were playing in high school, did it ever cross your mind to play in college, or what were some of your teammates looking at?
Yeah, because we won, we were ranked number 1. Pretty much all my teammates in high school, everyone was getting, recruited to most of the top colleges, and I was definitely looking at a few, but I decided not to play as a personal choice. Like I said, I was a little burnt out on it, to be honest, and then also had some severe concussions while I was playing in high school, and kind of just felt like my role, that what I wanted to do was be more the team behind the team. And so when I went to school, initially my undergrad was in kinesiology, and I was focusing on physical therapy because I wanted to be a physical therapist for a team. And then obviously that has changed since, but it was always kind of the idea, because even though I wasn't playing, I never lost my love for the game, and I wanted to be a part of it no matter what I did. And so, now I'm really excited that I've been able to be working in pro soccer for a little while now, and be kind of achieve that goal of being part of the team behind the team and helping guys to really perform at their highest level and still be part of the game at such a high level has been, a blessing for me. So no complaints on me not playing in college.
Absolutely. No, it's clear you have a pure love for the game. Looking at some of the roles you have been at, can you talk about some of the roles prior to your current position at Minnesota United? So my understanding is you got some great experience when you were in undergraduate and graduate school, working in semi-professional and professional soccer.
Yeah, so I originally, like I said, I did an undergraduate in kinesiology at San Diego State University. And then right out of the gate from there, I actually wound up shortly afterwards doing an internship with this company called EXOS. Back then it was Core Performance. And they now, they serve hundreds of places across the world and a lot of big time teams across the world. And so back then I got a little bit of experience with the U.S. national team. They came in. It was 2010, before the 2010 World Cup, to do some of their screening assessments and stuff like that, and kind of was able to see what that was like in the training. And then shortly after that, about a year after that, I wound up actually getting an internship with Chivas USA, which is a team that used to be in Major League Soccer. For those of you who don't know Major League Soccer that well or aren't as familiar with Chivas USA, they were the previous iteration before LAFC. The LAFC owners bought their rights and everything, and then folded that team and then rebranded them as LAFC. And so I got experience working there for about a season and a half, and that was fantastic. I was a sports science intern for them, part-time, several days a week, really focusing on all the sports science stuff, especially back then it was heart rate more so than GPS, because GPS hadn't really hit the U.S. hard then. And yeah, it just exposed me to this whole world of what sports science was that I hadn't really learned about in school. And then on top of that, I got to be in a professional team environment, at a fairly young age, and kind of be exposed to that and what it's like working in, day out, and what it takes to be successful, not only for the players, but also as a coach and as a coaching staff. And so I was there for a year and a half, and then went into the private sector for a while and owned my own business in the Beverly Hills area for that, doing some personal training and sport performance, but really had the itch to get back in the team setting. And I wound up deciding I wanted to do a master's degree in something that had a lot of sports science focus, but also some strength conditioning. So I wound up doing it through Australian Catholic University, and I got a master's in high performance sport, which is basically combining sports science and strength conditioning. And through that, one of the options that you could do is you could do an industry internship. And somebody that I had worked with at Chivas was now the head athletic trainer for the San Jose Earthquakes in MLS. And they wound up, I ran into him at a sports science conference and connected again. And he basically told me that they needed a strength coach and a sports scientist with their USL, which is second division team in Reno, which was their affiliate. And I could go there and basically run an entire department, and we'll call it an internship basically. And they would provide housing and everything for me. So it was a no-brainer. So I jumped in on that, finished out the season with them. I came in about halfway through the season, and then was hired full on for the following year. So I was the head of strength conditioning and data analytics. And I wound up, just like I did in the internship, but even more once I was hired, doing everything, which was, all of the fitness, all the gym work, all the sports science, even nutrition, supplements, everything, because at a lower level, there's not much of a budget. So you have a very small staff. And so I was able to get a lot of experience with that. And it was a wonderful, wonderful time because I was still finishing my master's. So a lot of things I was learning, I could literally take and apply the very next day, which was fantastic for me growing as a practitioner. And then after 2 seasons there, I wound up getting the opportunity to go to Minnesota. And so I wound up moving to Minnesota about a year ago. And this was my first year with the team. And obviously 2020 was a wild year. So it was an interesting time to be back in MLS for the first time in a while. And also with all the roles that I wound up having to do and the success that we had as a team. So it was definitely a fun ride.
Yeah, absolutely. When you were working at your undergraduate level, it seems you were kind of at the forefront of, some of the sports science and strength conditioning, as well as kind of the interaction between both. Was that a conscious decision for you to pursue the master's, looking at, where we are as a field now? Could you see that explosion kind of waiting to happen?
Yes, absolutely. Like 100%. That was a huge reason why I chose the program that I chose. Because like I said, when I was working and interning at Chivas USA, that was my first exposure to sports science because they didn't really discuss it much during my undergrad, even though I had a really good undergrad program at San Diego State. It was just more focused on, general kinesiology and very much pushes people to go into physical therapy or occupational therapy or whatnot. And so I didn't have much exposure to the sports science side until I wound up getting the internship, and they said, this is what you're going to do. You're going to, manage this whole heart rate program, all of the data, the performance stuff that we're doing. And we're going to look at it from that side, creating reports and basically helping the coaching staff to make their decisions. And so that opened my eyes to a lot of that. And then a lot of the research and things like that coming out. And so once I did decide, yes, that I wanted to do master's, I didn't want to just go get a master's in general kines or general exercise science or even strength conditioning. Those are all fantastic programs that are out there and whatnot, but I felt like I really wanted something that had a sports science focus, especially with the data and the analysis, interpretation, the data visualization, things like that would help me to kind of catch up on a lot of the stuff that I had missed out on over the years, especially once I went in the private sector for a while. So I did the program at ACU, and I can't speak highly enough of it. It was fantastic, and I learned so much and really kind of set the stage for where I'm at now. If I hadn't have gone through that program, I wouldn't be where I am now with all that I learned, and then all the stuff I had to put in practice. And then everything that has happened since then is definitely attributed to wanting to have that sports science focus as part of my master's.
a fantastic decision on your end, because even now I see people that have master's degrees and the biggest thing is they don't have that practical experience, or, they don't know when they're on the field or how to change some practice loads and things like that. For anybody that's kind of unfamiliar with the distinctions between different roles in a high performance setting, can you explain some of the differences between what a strength coach is versus a fitness coach, or what sports science is in general?
Yeah, I think obviously it varies from club to club, or from team to team. Every role is different. A sports scientist at one club can do things completely different than what they have to do at a different club. And so you have to kind of keep that in mind. But generally speaking, at least with my club, when I was initially hired, I was hired on the strength coach, and then obviously we had some craziness of 2020 and some people leaving, and I wound up taking on the roles of the head fitness coach and the sports scientist. So for us, as far as the strength coach goes, I was responsible for planning and implementing the gym program for the team, throughout the year. So creating the annual plan, periodizing it, but then also the individualization with the players as well when possible. And then also responsible for planning and implementing the pre-training activation sessions that we would do for the team every day. So I would lead them through a kind of a pre-training session before we went out on the field. And then also, being responsible for the physical performance testing and the evaluation of all the players. And then from a head fitness coach standpoint, the role that I had and from the club was, planning and implementing obviously the fitness program for the team, which is, based on fitness testing and things like that. Individual max aerobic speed scores is what I like to go with. And then doing individual fitness sessions with certain players when they needed it, when they're coming back from certain things, but especially also, leading the top offs, as we call them. So at the end of training, if somebody needs extra sprint or extra high speed running or whatever, kind of leading the players through that. And then also, taking all of the on-field warm-ups, both before training and the matches. And then also from a bigger standpoint, planning the training sessions with the coaching staff from a physical performance perspective. So, going and, daily talking to them, obviously taking in a lot of the data from the sports science side, but, talking about weekly periodization, where are we at, what do we want to achieve, tomorrow, the next day, from a physical perspective, is tomorrow going to be a bigger day? Do we want to focus on more high speed running? Do we need to get that high speed running, sprinting, et cetera? Or are we going to shrink it down and make it smaller because we want to, increase the intensity and have a lot of X cells and D cells, things like that. Just working with the coaching staff as far as the periodization throughout the week. And then from a sports science standpoint, what I wound up doing is managing all of the data that's collected as far as the performance side. And then, not only just managing it and collecting it, but analyzing and interpreting it, especially the GPS, to monitor the players' health, their well-being and performance overall, working with the medical staff and the athletic trainers regarding any red flags that the players might have from the data. If anyone's at risk for overtraining or detraining, in specific metrics, things like that. If they need to be held out for certain things, or if we need to do top ops, just talking with them over that, especially with return to play, where they're at with that. And then also, monitoring, helping manage weekly workloads for all the players. And then, lastly, creating a daily training report for the coaching staff that basically sums up the training for that day and shows all the key metrics for every single player for that day. And then also kind of making recommendations as far as what we need to do next, how we need to plan the next day, the next few days, is from a periodization standpoint.
Okay, so when you're looking at some GPS data, I do have some experience, but like we were talking about previously, it's really becoming to the forefront now. Semi-professional teams, even a lot of college teams, are starting to work with GPS. For somebody that's unfamiliar with, what they're looking at, because you can get lost in the sea of data, what are some of the key metrics that an inexperienced coach or somebody just starting out should look at?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. It's really easy to get, lost in the weeds, I say, in the minutia, especially when it comes to data. So my whole thing, the way I try to approach it, and the recommendations that I have for people who, don't have as much experience, is try and keep it as simple as possible, until there's a very good understanding by all the coaches, the players, and the staff. And so for us, from a simple standpoint, the key metrics that we really look at on a regular basis, There's the volume-based metrics, which for us are, total distance, high-speed running distance, sprint distance, things like that. And then there's intensity-based, metrics. So number of sprints, number of XLs, number of decels, number of explosive efforts, things like that. And, from that, you can get a really good snapshot of what the training was like or the game or anything like that. And using those metrics to kind of go through the season, whether you're looking at acute to chronic workload ratios, weekly accumulated loads, things like that, whatever stuff you're looking at from an evidence-based standpoint, you can keep it to that 7, 8, 9, 10 metrics that are really key on a regular basis. And then as you start to understand those more, then you can kind of look into some of the other metrics that are a little bit bigger than that, maybe aren't going to be something that you're going to look at every single day, but you can just start kind of dipping your toes in. But if you can just focus on those, like I said, 7, 8, 9, 10, key metrics, I think, and really understanding them, then that will do a world of good, for you and your players and your team.
Mm-hmm. Have you been able to use some of those metrics to kind of reverse engineer the off-season program to individualize down by position?
Yeah. So, for us this year, the off season isn't very long because we wound up, going pretty far in the playoffs, which was great. And so for the fitness-based stuff, I like to design the off season more, not necessarily as far as there are total distances that I want them to hit each week. I make sure that within the week's training program for them that they're hitting certain distances, and especially with like high speed running distances or sprint. As we get closer and closer, I want to increase the intensity. And so there are certain metrics that I'm more interested in, but it's not necessarily the amount of distance because I'm not with the players. And so all I can do is rely on them to actually do it and tell me that they're doing it, and do it, as opposed to, I didn't give them any sort of GPS or anything like that this year, just because the off season was going to be so short for the most part. Mm-hmm. And so for us, it was more so having them maintain where they were at, because it was a short off season because we did go so long in the playoffs. But in a normal off season, it would be something that I would look into a little bit more as far as what I want to do week in, week out, and start to get more, start with a lot of volume and then obviously decrease volume and increase intensity as you get closer and closer to preseason.
Love it. I appreciate the insight on that. A big part of the season was played in Orlando when you were inside the bubble. Can you talk about, obviously beforehand, you have your idea of periodization and what you want to do, but there were some limitations down there as far as how many games you were playing and the turnaround time, and even limitations with equipment. So how was that experience for you?
Yeah, obviously, as everybody knows, this year was difficult no matter what role or league you're playing in. But for us, it started just with, after 2 weeks of the season, the league was shut down and we were under lockdown. And so initially just planning home workouts for the guys, and most of the guys had no equipment whatsoever. So, obviously doing body weight is not necessarily ideal for professional athletes. And then, so we had to do body weight for about a month, and then we were able to get them some lighter weights, at least so they had some sort of load, and kind of program that for a month or 6 weeks. And then once we were able to get back even to training and full team training, we still couldn't even use a gym right away because our state in Minnesota had some of the strictest regulations as far as gym use. And so we weren't even able to do that. And then once we were able to use a gym, we had about 3 weeks to get ready for the Orlando tournament. So obviously that's not an ideal kind of preseason, so to speak. So I really just focused on getting them back up to a strength base, not necessarily doing max strength, just basic, because they had gone months between really lifting, heavier loads. So I wasn't trying to just crush them. It was more just giving them some overall strength. And then once we moved into the Orlando tournament, really just doing simple power during the tournament to keep the guys fresh, as fresh as possible. And because we were rotating a lot of players as well. But within the Orlando tournament, there was constraints. I think we had gym, and there were a bunch of gyms down at the Orlando tournament, but you shared it with 2 other teams. So you had times every day that you had access to the gym, and the league just kind of rolled them over and planned them, and then you had specific times that you could go and train also, because you had a field that you shared with another team. And so there were times, and the same thing, they just rolled it over and said, okay, this week you're going to have these times for training and these times for the gym. but sometimes they overlapped, so you couldn't even use it, and there was nothing you could do. And so it was really about planning what can we do, when can we do it, what's going to be the most effective. And I think for the guys, having those gym sessions, even though they were just really kind of focused on simple power and whatnot, really helped with giving them something extra to do, because we were just locked in a hotel resort. We couldn't leave other than going to training or to go to games. And so giving them something to do, it was something for them to look forward to, which was great because it helped me to get a lot of buy-in, because they wanted to go in there and work hard. And I think that showed, and that kind of transferred over once we got out of Orlando, because once we got out of Orlando and we were back in Minnesota for the regular season, we still had regulations in the state, and I had to separate players into small lifting groups for their gym work. And obviously we had the most fixture congestion, ever in a season once we got back. So it wasn't ideal. So it would have been really easy for the guys to just say, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not be into it. But because we were able to get a lot of motivation and really get them into it in Orlando, it carried over, which was great. So the guys were willing to do whatever they needed to do. And, with the schedule, we didn't really have we had hardly any real training weeks. And most of the times it was play a game, day off, then recover, then match day -1, then play again, and then repeat. And so, not ideal, obviously, from a training standpoint on the field, but also in the gym. So I generally tried to have 2 gym sessions per week if possible. Not always ideal, or not always feasible. But then also I'd separate it in groups. So the guys who had played heavy minutes, maybe they don't need to do one of the workouts, or I just want you to do one set of everything, almost to facilitate some recovery. Whereas the guys who didn't play, you're going to do the whole thing so that you're getting a good load, things like that, trying to manage it, and different times and different players. And it was definitely, we had to get creative. We had to create almost a second gym out on our turf area indoor, because we could only have 4 guys working out at the same time based on our regulations. And so we had 4 in one gym, created another gym outside, or on the turf, so that we could actually have 8 people at the same time, but we weren't breaking any regulations, and, things like that, just really getting creative. And I think it was a challenge, but it also helped me grow as a practitioner, like 100%, because, like I said, you had to get creative and really do things differently than you normally would. And the things that you learn in classes, or reading research, or, talking to other people in the industry, it was just very different. And I'm thankful that I was able to go through it, because hopefully any other season from here on out is going to be a heck of a lot easier than 2020 was.
I hope so. There's definitely some things you can carry forward into this off season and into your next preseason for sure. Well, you've come into a new role this year. You've worked with a lot of different teams over the years. When you see an athlete for the first time, is there any kind of screens or questionnaires or movements you'd like them to perform, or just to get an idea of the kind of person you're working with?
Yeah, I think I've been lucky that I've worked with, some really great people, both on the performance side, but also especially on the medical side. And, generally most of the places that I've been, the athletic trainers and our medical staff do most of the screening, just as far as imbalances and weaknesses and things like that, for the most part, as far as just, basic screens. So I usually don't, I let them do that, because that's more in their wheelhouse. And so what I like to do is I try and keep it simple as far as the physical performance side. And I'll do some 3-rep max tests in the gym. Especially, I always do trap bar deadlift, because that's usually part of my program for most of the year in some facet. And so I want to get a sense of where the guys are at for that. But then I also will use that to program percentages and things when I'm doing certain blocks or certain phases where I want to use the percentages. And then, sometimes we'll do squats, sometimes we'll do bench. The other things, it just depends on the person, or what we're going to have planned for the team coming forward. But then also I always do NordBoard for eccentric hamstring strength. And I think that is invaluable. I try and test the guys, not only the first day of preseason, but also, once every 4 to 6 weeks, depending on our schedule, all throughout the season, just to get a general sense of where their eccentric hamstring strength is, if there are any imbalances, weaknesses, things like that. And then same thing, we use the groin bar for adductor, abductor strength. And again, testing that preseason, but then also every 4 to 6 weeks to, again, just to see the kind of trend throughout the season to make sure guys aren't, losing too much and aren't getting to the point where there's going to be red flags where they're below certain thresholds that we want them to be, that where there's, higher injury risk and so things like that. And then I'll do simple power thing like a broad jump. I'm a big fan of that because it's such a simple power exercise, but you can measure that. It's easily replicable throughout the season, again, to test and see how their power's going. Obviously, I didn't have access to force plates, but if I had access to force plates, I would do some jump testing as well to measure, certain power aspects, but RSI, peak force, things like that. But yeah, I try and keep it pretty simple because I know from a player standpoint, they don't like to just go through a battery of tests, a huge battery. It just gets, they stop. From my standpoint, they stop really trying to perform well in them and then just try to get through it. And then you're not really getting good data in that standpoint. So if I can do 3, 4, 5 instead of 10, I do that anytime.
That makes sense. So the tests you do, they really drive your performance programming going forward. It's not just we're testing just to get the test in.
Exactly. And like from the Nord board and the groin bar standpoint, if we see weaknesses or anything, then that helps me to address it right away. Myself and our athletic trainers, our medical staff will get together and, create a prehab program for them to do before training, before the pre-training activations. But then also it allows me to know, okay, I'm also going to add some hamstring specific exercises for this person individually, or some adductor exercises and not just what, I have generally set out. And so, again, like you said, it drives my program forward, and it's not just collecting data to collect data.
Absolutely. Great point. Do you work with the academy program at all? Is there any interaction there, or are you just with the first team?
No, I'm just with the first team. So we didn't have an academy strength coach this year. And then because of 2020 and the changeover from the USDA to now the MLS is next, I think our academy kind of shut down for a little while and then, is like rebooting. And so I'm sure I'll have some say in it and also a little bit more working with the academy here and there. I did a few things this year when they were, at home during lockdown and created some programs and things like that, just general stuff for them to do because they didn't have anyone that was able to give them guidance. But generally speaking, my role for right now has just been just with the first team.
Awesome. Okay. Last question for you. And this one really is a big picture item because you have worked across a lot of different aspects with private training or personal training into the team sport. Is there anything you learned from that one-on-one or private environment that you've been able to implement in a team setting that some coaches might not be aware of?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously before coming into this role and before even the role in Reno, I was lucky that I had the experience as the intern in MLS, years ago. So I kind of knew what to expect and how to operate and be successful as a coach, thanks to my former mentor who I worked for, Jim Liston, when I was at Chivas. But when I went into the private setting and then once I was coming back, I originally thought that my period away from the team setting and in the private sector was going to be a barrier. Because there are not too many people who do that. A lot of times you hear people going the opposite way. They've been in the team setting for a while and they want to go in the private sector. But so I was just a little uneasy about how I was going to be able to translate everything back to the team setting. But, and I've come to realize that it actually it has been a huge advantage for me to have had several years running that business and especially in the private setting, doing the one-on-one trainings, whether it's personal training or performance training or one-on-twos, whatever it is. Because when you're doing that, when you're in that setting, you have to keep the client engaged the entire time, for the most part. So you're talking to them a lot, obviously you get to know them on a personal level because you're seeing them multiple times a week for months or years on end. I had clients that I trained for 5 or 6 years. And so I really got to know them, on a personal level, get to know their motivations, their fears, their story, their backstory, whatever it is, and just kind of really peel back the layers of the onion, so to speak, and get to know like who they really are. And I think what I've done is I've been able to bring that into the team setting with my athletes, both, when I went to Reno originally and then now here in Minnesota. I'm a big fan of Brett Bartholomew's work. with the conscious coaching book that he wrote. You know, he's a friend of mine. I trained at the same gym as him for a while when he actually released that conscious coaching book. And so I'm a big fan of that and all the stuff he does with the Art of Coaching website. And I'm a big believer in a lot of stuff that he preaches from a psychological and sociological standpoint. And I really try to get to know my athletes, you know, on a personal level. You know, they're not just soccer players, right? I'm not just a performance coach. Like, there's a lot more to everybody other than what they do for a job. And so try to relate to them, you know, find out their why is something I like to do. You know, who are they away from the game? You know, where do they come from? What do they enjoy? You know, and again, just really try and find things to relate to, because then you're able to kind of pick and choose certain things and use different motivational tactics to gain an overall buy-in from the players and then from the team overall. And I think my ability to do that this season was a huge reason why I was able to get a lot of buy-in, you know. And I think us being in Orlando in a hotel, basically locked in the hotel for 40 days because we went to the semis of that tournament, really helped with that, because I could just pull guys aside after lunch or after dinner, or, you know, they'd come into the gym early and just have conversations with them, not necessarily anything about training. Or if they ask me a question at training, then I can say, okay, let's talk after lunch, or let's meet in the lounge and go over this, and just, again, kind of just peel back the layers and get to know what are they interested in, why do they want to know this, you know, what's their overall end game with their career, with what do they want to go into coaching, do they want to, you know, all sorts of different stuff, you know, their kids, everything, and just really being able to get to know the guys. And by the end of that tournament, I had achieved a lot of buy-in, and I think that translated over to the season once we got back to Minnesota and had the fixture congestion. And you know, I think it really helped me be successful with the team, especially considering I was having to do 3 jobs. The guys really got to understand, like, hey, you know, I'm pulling a lot of weight here, and you know, they appreciated it, and they appreciated all the time I was able to give to them. And I think I'd like to think that the success I was able to get with the buy-in with the players from a performance side, you know, contributed on some small level to the success that we had overall in the season, and making the semifinal, and, you know, being 5 minutes away from MLS Cup final. So I think that is what I've really taken from my time in the private sector.
Love it. At the end of the day, the athlete's got to know, like, and trust you. With that trust, you know, you're getting 100% out of them. So that's great.
Exactly.
Adam, I appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your perspectives today, and look forward to following Minnesota for this upcoming season. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you. Bye-bye. This episode is released just a couple of days prior to the first day of preseason for MLS teams, actually. So Adam's going to have his hands full next week working with Minnesota United. MLS day 1 of preseason is set for the 8th of March, and the first weekend or first games will be the 17th of April. So he's going to have a busy couple of weeks ahead in store for himself. Big thanks to Adam for coming on during the off-season and kind of explaining how he got from the private setting into working with Minnesota United Football Club. You can follow Adam on Instagram and on LinkedIn as well. Feel free to add him as a friend. On Instagram, it's APARR Fitness, APARR Fitness. LinkedIn is Adam C. Parr. Talk to you guys soon.